On a May morning in 2013, during an investigation that until then was only about the disappearance of a teenage girl, police officers entered a certain house in Telford, England. In one of the rooms there, they found a cell phone SIM card that was just lying around. The SIM card was collected and sent for analysis. And when the first images started to appear, the investigators realized that this was not a simple missing person case. There were the answers that connected all the dots of a story that had started out simple but was now taking a completely disturbing turn. I'm Marcos Campos. Welcome, everyone. Every week here on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, there are new episodes and occasionally extra cases as well. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss out. Becoming a member helps support my productions. Please like, comment, even just an emoji matters. Given that, let's get to the facts. It all starts on a Sunday, May 26th, 2013 in the city of Telford, in the West Midlands region of England. It was a pretty typical spring day. Georgia Williams was 17 years old and she spent that day at home just relaxing with her family, you know? That pleasant weekend vibe. They even had a barbecue. Nothing there drew attention to anything unusual that might be happening. It was really a typical Sunday with the family, nothing out of the ordinary. In the early evening, however, around 7:30, Georgia told her parents that she was going to meet a friend. She said she wouldn't be long, that she would be out for a few hours, and that she would be back that same night before, let's say, close to midnight. Way before that, it was something normal for her. Georgia would sometimes do this kind of thing, you know? She'd go out to hang out with friends, nothing that the family found strange. Well, she left, the hours went by, but Georgia, unlike what always happened, didn't come back that day. Later on, her mother sent a message asking if everything was okay. Georgia replied saying she had met up with some friends and wanted to spend a little more time with them. But she asked her mother, her parents anyway, not to worry, that everything was fine, that she would come back. Well, because of that, her parents didn't contact her again, nor did they panic because they knew Georgia. She was very responsible, committed. She wouldn't do anything that would put her life in danger, right? I don't know, do something her parents couldn't know about, you know? Even though she was only 17 years old, right? Despite all the reports about her biography indicating that she was super responsible and all, I don't know, she was only 17 years old, right guys? Well, long story short, her parents went to sleep that day. The next morning when they woke up, they realized that Georgia hadn't come home. Her room was untouched, the bed hadn't been slept in, nothing. The mother then, of course, immediately sent her another message. "Hey honey, where are you?" Georgia replied. She said she had spent the night at a friend's house and that she would show up later. Still that day, she said she would take care of her errands and then go home. She had, just as they say in the countryside, crashed at her friend's house. She also added that her phone battery was low and about to die, and she had no way to charge it, which also caught her mother's attention at that moment. That raised a bit of suspicion, but it's just that Georgia didn't usually leave her phone like that, unattended, and always made sure it was fully charged. She also wasn't the type to sleep away from home without letting anyone know. But there's a first time for everything, right? Maybe she just went out and was having a good time. She went out, slept at a friend's place, forgot her charger, and maybe her friend didn't have one, right? There are a lot of maybes in this story, trying to find a reason for how strangely everything has happened so far, right? Monday went by and Georgia didn't come home again. And here, I don't know why. Maybe it's a matter of culture or habits, I don't know. Do you feel that strongly about it? Because if it were me imagining a story like this, I'd go crazy. I'd look for my daughter like a madman until I found her, right? But in this case, what's reported is that on Tuesday, May 28th, that's when the situation really started to become alarming for George's family. Because she didn't keep the commitments she had that day. And it was at that moment that Steve and Lynette Williams, her parents, were sure that something was very wrong. So they started calling friends, colleagues, acquaintances, that basic routine, you know, when someone disappears. Let's try with the closest people to see if anyone has any news or something. Nobody knew anything, so they got in touch with George's boyfriend, Matt. Matt didn't know anything either. He said he didn't meet her that weekend, not on Monday, not on Tuesday. Then the messages sent to her cell phone stopped being answered. There was that last message, she said her phone was dying, the battery and all that. Calls also went straight to voicemail, no sign of her later that same day. So, her parents went to the police and that's when an investigation began, initially as a missing person case. During the first statements, her parents reported everything they knew: the last moments with their daughter, the barbecue at home, her leaving around 7:30, the messages received afterwards saying that everything was fine, that they shouldn't worry, and so on. So, the investigators wrote all that down and started following the first leads, right? Georgia hadn't gone out to meet a specific group of people. Okay, guys, it wasn't like a group of friends. Remember that she left and said, "Look, I'm gonna meet a friend and I'll be right back." Well, she had gone to meet a specific person, and that person's name was Jamie Reynolds. Jamie lived there in Telford too, in the Wellington area. More precisely, he was someone Georgia already knew very well, because the two of them worked together there, at a local gas station for Georgia. So that meeting with her friend was routine, and this job she had was her first job. She worked there part-time to, save up some money and all. And it was there that they met. George and Jamie got closer, started talking. According to people, they maintained a friendship. Well, like, how can I put it? It was really constant, part of their daily routine. They talked a lot at work, exchanged messages, and occasionally met outside of work hours. Jamie was also known by George's family, at least by sight, okay? Because when her parents passed by this gas station, it was apparently right there, in the neighborhood, in the area. At least Jamie, always seemed like a very polite guy. Greeted people, was communicative, totally normal on that Sunday. There on May 26th, Georgia told her parents that Jamie had stopped by. He asked her for a very specific favor: to take some pictures, because he wanted to change direction in his life. So, being young too, he wanted to become a professional photographer. He was putting together a portfolio, that's right. So Georgia agreed to help. And it was the kind of thing that, in a way, was part of her personality. I don't know if Jamie knew, he probably did. It's not that she was a girl who was, how can I say, she liked to help people, right? In her life, then, at 17 years old, she was involved in projects that dealt with bullying at school, She would give support, talk to people, and all that. So maybe the guy saw an opportunity there, right? To see in Georgia someone he could ask to help out in the photo session he wanted. Well, so she left her house around 7:30, like I mentioned, and went straight to Jamie's house. And this then would be the last confirmed place, in quotes, where Georgia supposedly was, in quotes. I say that because there were those messages. The police still needed to investigate all of this, and when the police received the missing person report, that information started to be treated with more attention, but not as an accusation yet. It's far from that, it's just a starting point. After all, that really could have been the last place, right? So what did the investigators need to do? Understand everything that had happened, talk to that person, to Jamie, to find out what they talked about. If Georgia left there, where did she go, and so on. So the first step was pretty simple. Check the house where Georgia went that night, right? Jamie's house. So the police went there, but Georgia wasn't there, and Jamie wasn't there either. The house was quiet, apparently empty. There was no sign of recent activity, nor any indication that Georgia had spent the night there. That was information too, right? By itself, it didn't mean anything, right? But it added another layer of uncertainty to the story, didn't it? The investigators started trying to locate Jamie to talk to him and understand what had happened. If he had really seen Georgia that day. It wasn't about making him a suspect yet, nothing like that. The priority was to hear from the young man, clarify the timeline of events, and understand if he could help explain what had happened to Georgia. Meanwhile, her parents kept trying to contact their daughter's cell phone, but their messages went unanswered and their calls went straight to voicemail. None of her friends or classmates knew anything, but no one was sure if Georgia had actually gone to meet Jamie. The investigation starts to get more serious from this point on, I would say. After all, Georgia wasn't like that, as we've seen, at least according to her family, right? So, given that, for now, there was only one thing to look into with Jamie, right? Let's go find Jamie. Where could he have gone? With Georgia? Officially registered as missing, the police started to treat the case as a priority. There were no clear signs of a crime at that moment, but her pattern of behavior didn't really match a simple delay or suddenly a voluntary disappearance. Georgia wasn't the type to disappear like that without telling her parents, and she didn't ignore the commitments she had made. Basically, guys, she never went off the grid. The immediate focus of the investigation was to locate Jamie, as we saw, right? So the investigators started by trying to contact him directly, calling, sending messages, but nothing. No one could say exactly where Jamie was at the beginning of that week. That by itself wasn't proof of anything either, but it made it harder to clarify what had happened that night, right? So, could we say unofficially that it made Jamie a suspect? Unable to locate the young man, the police began to check more objective records. Security camera systems from banks, from streets, vehicle data, and some things started to show up and be analyzed. The agents knew that Jamie usually drove a white van, which supposedly belonged to his stepfather, so this vehicle was put on the investigation's radar. Meanwhile, the days went by and Georgia was still missing. On the 28th, still on Tuesday, some information started to appear about Jamie's movements with that van. This was already being mapped since Sunday when Georgia disappeared. These records automatically recognized the license plates of that van, and the security footage indicated that it really was Jamie's stepfather's van there, and it had been seen outside the Telford area where both of them lived. The records showed the van heading north, passing through areas that were not part of Jamie's known routine. At that moment, it wasn't possible to know the reason for these trips, for these strange movements. But it became clear that he had left the area shortly after this supposed meeting with Georgia. Later that same day, new footage actually caught the white van in Glasgow, Scotland. City security cameras recorded the vehicle parked on an ordinary street. At one point, a man was caught there, outside the van. He was changing clothes right there in the middle of the street, calmly. He didn't seem, like someone in a hurry or anxious, just changing clothes, nothing like that. He was relaxed, didn't show any nervousness, totally natural, changing his clothes there as if nothing had happened, right in the middle of the street. For the investigators, that raised some questions. It's not about why Jamie was in Glasgow. It was likely that this man was him. But why had he traveled so far, right after his friend Georgia disappeared, after he supposedly made a request to her? Why was he changing clothes in the middle of the street? Damn, so many questions and so few answers. With this information in hand, the police were able to make a bit more progress. Using lodging data and local records as well, they managed to locate Jamie Reynolds. He was at a hotel in downtown Glasgow and he was alone. Georgia was not with him. The police went to the hotel, talked to Jamie there, and asked if he knew where Georgia was. Jamie replied that he didn't. I have no idea. He said he had no idea what could have happened to her after that Sunday night. He implied that he did, in fact, meet with her, but his answer didn't convince the investigators. No, not at that moment. The sum of the factors, I would say, was already too great for anything to be ignored. Georgia had disappeared after going to meet Jamie. He had left the city right after she disappeared, was hundreds of kilometers away when the family reported her missing, and didn't have any clear explanation for these trips. So, for his story then, on May 29th, Jamie Reynolds was arrested in Glasgow on suspicion of kidnapping, and he was then taken back to Telford with Jamie in custody. The investigation had already moved to a new phase. Now, the police had authorization to search, let's say, the last place where Georgia had supposedly been, Jamie Reynolds' house, with Jamie in custody. The police went back there then to the Wellington area where he lived to conduct a thorough search of the house. Until then, the officers had quickly gone through the place just to check if Georgia was there or not, back when it was first reported that she was missing, right? Now the objective was different. They were actually looking for elements, clues, evidence, anything. The police started searching room by room, but nothing seemed out of place. At first glance, the house wasn't ransacked. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, nor any visible stains that would indicate violence. For example, to someone who looked quickly, everything seemed to be in place. But searches like this can't just be a quick look, right? During this sweep then, the agents found a cell phone card, a SIM card lying around the house. Not inside the phone, it was just there, as if it had been taken out. That, of course, caught their attention. That card was seized and sent for analysis. When the forensic experts started looking at what was on it, the images that were on it. It's important to say that they found files, even though many had been deleted, but they managed to recover a good part of the material, okay? What was found there completely changed the course of this missing person investigation. The images showed Georgia Williams inside Jamie's house. Some photos seemed to have been taken right at the beginning of what looked like a photo shoot, just like she told her parents she was really going to do, right? Help her friend? Georgia seemed fine. apparently cooperating, like someone who was really there to help a friend. Other images, however, showed something different. They indicated that Georgia had suffered serious injuries inside the residence. The photos left no doubt that she had been violently attacked in that place based solely on the contents of that card. Yes, so the police came to an inevitable conclusion. Georgia was not missing. She was probably already dead. The investigation officially shifted at that point, and the case was treated as a homicide. The problem is that even though they now knew what had supposedly happened to Georgia, the investigators still didn't know where she was, where her body was. Jamie Reynolds wasn't cooperating at all. He denied any involvement and didn't give any solid information about Georgia's whereabouts. This forced the police to take another approach, to reconstruct step by step everything Jamie had done. From the night of the crime, or the alleged crime, until the moment of his arrest, the investigators already knew that Georgia had been killed at Jamie's house. At least, everything they had found up to that point indicated that. On the night of May 26, 2013, they also knew that he was arrested in Glasgow 3 days later. In other words, Jamie, isn't it? The interval between those 2 points became the central focus of the investigation. Now, what did he do during that whole period? Where was he? How did he kill Georgia? What did he do after that? Where was the body? To answer these questions, the police started cross-referencing all possible sources. Camera records, license plate recognition systems, cell phone data, footage from gas stations, parking lots, commercial establishments, everything. The idea is to track down that white van. Little by little, Jamie's movements started to take shape in a more linear way, I would say. And as this timeline was being put together, a pattern also began to emerge. Jamie hadn't gone straight to Glasgow where he was captured. He had passed through several places before that. And here is where the really morbid, disturbing details of this case begin. Without any cooperation from Jamie, the police started to follow another path. If he wouldn't say where he had been after Sunday night, the records would, right? There's no way to deny the footage. Little attention was given to the van, as I told you, and the police combed through every camera, everything you can imagine. And already on Monday, May 27th, putting together this timeline. That is, right after Georgia disappeared, in the afternoon of the 27th. A camera showed Jamie filling up his van at a gas station. He seemed normal, paid there, got into the vehicle, and continued his trip shortly after filling up the van. Another recording showed Jamie. In the Wrexham area, the cameras at a movie theater showed Jamie going in alone to watch a movie, alone in quotes, right? The van was parked outside. It stayed there the whole time while he was watching a movie. For the investigators, that was the most disturbing detail, because at that moment the police believed, or rather the police believe, right? After everything they investigated, that Georgia was already lifeless and her body was inside the van. Jamie left the movie theater, got in the van, and continued his journey. He seemed calm, unhurried, without any visible sign of stress. Nothing in that footage indicated someone who was suddenly fleeing, panicking, or trying to hide a crime. From that point on, the movement started to spread out. The van was identified in different regions of the country, in Wales and also in the northwest of England. Without a direct route or an obvious destination, the constant changes in direction raised the suspicion that Jamie was trying to make it harder for the police to track him. To move forward, the police decided to involve the public. Images of this white van were released along with a request. Anyone who had seen that vehicle there between the 26th and 29th, which was the period when the images were released, should get in touch. The responses started coming in. Among the reports received, one stood out in particular. Some people said they had helped a driver whose van had gotten stuck in the mud on a rural road, there in that region of Wrexham in the north of Wales. These people managed to help get the vehicle out of the mud, and then the guy who got stuck there continued his journey. No one suspected anything until this request from the police. But when they saw the images, they realized it was Jamie Reynolds, who was already a suspect in Georgia's disappearance. With this information then, the investigators turned their attention to that region. It was an isolated area, surrounded by dense vegetation, stretches of forest that were rarely visited. In other words, a rural zone. Search teams were sent to the location and began to comb through everything. So on Friday, May 31, 2013, the police made a discovery in a forested area. There they found the body of Georgia Williams. She was naked, partially exposed, with no signs of any elaborate attempt to conceal the body. The body was already showing advanced signs of decomposition because it had been there for several days out in the open. The identification was confirmed and it really was Georgia. So, With the discovery of George's body, the police began to consolidate the evidence they had already gathered. From Jamie's house, the SIM card from the cell phone, which was found there, became the central focus of the investigation. The technical analysis confirmed that Jamie had recorded the entire sequence of events in images. These were not isolated or accidental recordings. The photos were taken intentionally during and after George's death. The first images showed Georgia cooperating. As I mentioned to you, isn't this a clear indication of an ambush? She had no idea what was about to happen, but then the images started to capture what that man had inside him. Georgia appears immobilized. The police identified the use of handcuffs and an improvised suspension system that was set up there, a kind of hatch in the attic. This device had already been prepared in advance. Obviously, the following photos documented the attack itself. Georgia was suspended by this rope placed around her neck, and she died from strangulation. During the movement, there are no signs of an accident. Is it okay to suddenly take a photo like this? First of all, I don't think Georgia would accept something this foolish, so obviously it was something premeditated. This method used the preparation of the place and the sequence of the images made it clear that this was a sick, intentional act. After the death, Jamie kept photographing the body. The images showed Georgia being moved to different rooms in the house, being dragged, right? Some photos were taken in Jamie's parents' bedroom, others recorded abuses committed after the death. This material was considered extremely disturbing, even for the investigators. So, more experienced also because I don't know if they see so much barbarity that often, right? In that area then, the guys from the police, the investigators, were really shaken by all of this. And the search of the house revealed yet another crucial element for the case. Jamie had written dozens of sexual fantasy texts completely out of the ordinary, and everything was stored on one of his electronic devices. More than 40 of these texts described in detail situations of violence against women. Among these files, there was one specific text that caught their attention. It had been written before Georgia's death and described exactly what would be done to her. The text mentioned a method, the sequence of acts, and the fate of the body. The content directly matched the images that were found on that card, right? For the police, this eliminated any doubt about premeditation. The crime wasn't impulsive. It wasn't the result of an argument. You know, that momentary loss of control, heat of the moment, none of that. Jamie had something in his head, an evil seed. He had planned all of that in advance and wanted to carry out the plan. The evidence also showed that Jamie was the one who sent those messages from Georgia's cell phone to her parents, and she was already dead, those images. I met some friends and decided to stay longer. I slept at a friend's and will come later. He handled everything until the phone died. In fact, with this set of evidence, the investigation then reached its final conclusion. Georgia Williams had been murdered inside Jamie Reynolds' house on the night of May 26, 2013, in a crime that was planned and carried out coldly, to say the least, right? What was left now wasn't to understand if Jamie was responsible, but to understand how someone with this background, which I'll get to in a moment. What mattered now was to understand how Jamie managed to put into practice something he had been imagining for quite some time. Look, guys, I need to introduce Jamie to you a bit better. He wasn't unknown to the authorities, okay? As unbelievable as it sounds, I wish I could say otherwise, but I can't, right? It's more common than it should be, isn't it? The first record involving his name with the police is from 2008. At that time, he was about 18 years old. He supposedly lured a 16-year-old girl to his house with the same smooth talk. Taking pictures, making a portfolio. The young girl agreed, right? With good intentions, she went there, and he used the same modus operandi. But at a certain point, Jamie tried to take the girl to a more secluded area of the house. When she refused, she made it clear she wanted to leave. He grabbed her by the neck and tried to strangle the girl. She managed to fight back, struggled there, pushed the guy and took off, ran away, went to the police, and filed a report. But despite the seriousness of the attack, Jamie wasn't charged with anything. Formally, he only got a verbal warning. Don't do that, little boy. It's very bad to try to strangle your little friend. No further action was taken and he walked away free as a bird. In 2011, a new incident occurred. Jamie showed romantic interest in a coworker. She didn't reciprocate. Shortly after that, he put his car in reverse and rammed it into her car. The case was treated as a traffic accident. There was no thorough investigation nor any criminal consequences. In this case, I'm not sure if the girl was afraid to say he did it on purpose. I know that in February 2013, a few months before George's murder, another incident was recorded. Jamie lured a young woman to his house, locked the doors, and said he couldn't find the key. Can you believe it? He tried to convince the girl to spend the night there with him. The young woman said, of course, that she wanted to leave at a certain point, so he unlocked the door and she managed to escape. This incident also came to the attention of the authorities, but nothing more happened. There was an even more alarming situation. Jamie's own mother and stepfather went to the police at one point after they found an exorbitant amount of extremely violent pornographic material on his computer. The material included thousands of images and videos depicting women being assaulted, strangled, and suspended by ropes. Can you believe that? Concerned, they asked the authorities for help. Jamie was even sent for a professional evaluation. A doctor who saw him at the time even wrote a report saying that he posed a significant risk to others. Even so, nothing effective was done. He wasn't monitored and he wasn't treated as a real threat. There were no restrictions, no continuous monitoring, no concrete intervention. Each episode was treated in isolation, as if it wasn't part of a pattern, you know? After the murder of Georgia Williams, it became clear that the signs had been there all along. The guy already had fantasies like that. Morbid ones, an obsession with violence. He didn't handle rejection in a normal way. He fantasized about some bizarre things. But none of that stopped Jamie from continuing to live in society normally, from having the opportunity to meet and kill Georgia. After all, he was working, right? If he had a record of all that behavior, maybe people wouldn't have been put on a collision course with this guy. With Georgia Williams's body found and the evidence consolidated, Jamie Reynolds was formally charged with murder. At first, he denied involvement and said he didn't know what happened. Confronted with the evidence, he then claimed memory loss and said he didn't remember the crime. He only had flashes, isolated ones, and this version, of course, was not accepted in court. The trial began in December 2013. The people who were there reported that he behaved strangely and contradictorily. Outside the courtroom, he seemed calm, but inside, he was kind of withdrawn, kind of serious, almost like he was acting, trying to mislead someone. It was an attempt, at least that's how the prosecution saw it, as real manipulation, acting. On the first day of the trial, Jamie Reynolds changed his statement and pleaded guilty. Psychiatric reports presented in court indicated that he posed an extreme risk to people and that if he hadn't been detained, he would probably do it again. Oh, come on. Given that, the judge imposed the maximum sentence allowed in the United Kingdom, life imprisonment, with a full-term order, which means he can't apply for parole. He became one of the youngest to receive this sentence. After his conviction, an independent review of the local police's actions in the region was launched, and of other agencies that also, in some way, were involved or had contact with Jamie before George's murder. After all, with a record like that, how was this guy free? It's the same issue discussed at the trial about the murder. Why did she have to lose her life? So that people could see the obvious then? In reviewing the entire handling by everyone involved, by the professionals, it became clear that there were serious failures. The authorities were aware of his behavior, a pattern of risk, and so what was left was to recognize that Georgia was neglected by the system. It was concluded that if the proper measures had been taken, the crime probably wouldn't have happened. The local police apologized. The family stated that changes had been made to the risk assessment protocol. Again, I have to ask, does someone always have to pay with their life for things to change? For Steve Williams, George's father, who was also a member of the police, right? I didn't mention it before, but he's a police officer. That conclusion had a significant impact because, besides losing his daughter in such a premature, cowardly, and brutal way, there was also a feeling of institutional betrayal. For him too, right? After the crime, family and friends created the Georgia Williams Trust, which is an organization dedicated to supporting young people in achieving their goals, especially through scholarships, educational programs, and community initiatives. Georgia's mother, Lynette Williams, also turned her pain into a memory. She wrote the book Our Georgia, in which she tells her daughter's whole story and the impact of the loss. The work received public recognition and became a way to keep Georgia's identity alive. Besides the crime that took her life, Georgia Williams' case, guys, ended, of course, with a final conviction. So, considering what this guy did, right? He'll die behind bars, but this case will never disappear. Isn't it that permanent scar, and I would say a fresh one, right? because of the family's pain and this bizarre biblical failure of the justice system, right? But I want to know your opinion. Leave a comment. I really appreciate your company here. Please like and comment. It helps our work. Redhead kiss. See you next episode.